now with Mark Bird, the Managing Director of GBGB, the body, as I mentioned, that registers greyhound tracks and governs them. And Clarissa Baldwin, the Chair of the Greyhound Forum, the former Chief Executive of the Dogs Trust. If I could start with you, please, Clarissa. So we're just hearing there, 86% rehomed or retained by trainers. That's okay, isn't it?
Well, on the basis of that sort of figure, yes. But unfortunately, a lot of the trainers' kennels are in such a terrible state. A lot of the trainers are themselves quite elderly, haven't kept up with how to look after dogs properly. So I think that needs a lot more investigation before one can say that they are happily rehomed.
Mark,
the Greyhound Trust does a fantastic job rehoming nearly 4,000 dogs a year. And the other charities like Dogs Trust, RSPCA, Battersea, Blue Cross, all of them do a great job in rehoming dogs. But this is an industry that's in decline, and it's time for a radical review of everything that they do.
Mark, is she right? Is it the figures are actually masking the full story here?
Well, it depends what you call the full story. At the end of the day, the figures are the first time that we as the regulator have published them, and we did that in conjunction with DEFRA.
Because you had to.
Recommendations. Well, not because we had to. We worked in conjunction with them to do it. And in fact, if you compare what we're doing compared to horse racing, I mean, horse racing only published fatality figures, so we've gone well beyond that in terms of both the injuries, fatalities, but also in terms of retirements and obviously with rehoming. So I think it's not a question of, and I would challenge Clarissa on the fact that it's a declining industry. The industry has certainly shrunken from where it was, but I now think we're getting to a point where the industry is probably going to turn around and actually start to increase.
One thing I'd like to know from you, Mark, please, is we heard earlier from the League Against Cruel Sports. Now, they said if a dog doesn't make it through training, obviously they're bred to be racers, and if they're not good enough, if they don't make the grade, well, perhaps they're dispatched. What actually happens to any dogs that aren't good enough to become a racing dog?
Okay, well, there's two areas where dogs come from. One is from Ireland, where the vast majority of dogs are reared as pups and then looked at being licensed. And, of course, as a regulator, we take over from that point when a dog is first registered with us. There's lots of scare stories about what happens to dogs that don't meet the grade. I mean, there was someone who was opposed to greyhound racing the other day said that her dog had been hit over the head with a shovel in Ireland because it didn't make the grade. We refute that, and certainly we work with our colleagues in Ireland, and there are no stories of dogs ending up in pets. Sorry, what does happen? They become pets. It's as simple as that.
I think that's just stretching it a bit far. Of course, a lot are put down in Ireland, and we know that for a fact. But the Greyhound Board gets very highly criticised for not doing the right job, but actually they are strangled for money, and it's time that the bookmakers recognise their moral and ethical responsibility and put some serious money into this industry and to protect the welfare of greyhounds from cradle to grave. And that is not happening at the moment, and that's why you get this disparity of people saying it's time for a ban because it's been going on far too long.
What do you think, Clarissa, then? Do you think a ban is too far?
I do think the greyhounds love it, but and if you watch them on the course, they are so beautiful, and they seem to be very happy to go back to their handlers. But what we're worried about is at the beginning and at the end, and we can't go on fighting for this unless something happens.
So what would the money be used for?
Well, certainly to upgrade the kennels, to bring training to all the owners and trainers of greyhounds, to put more money into rehoming of greyhounds. There is an endless thing, and actually that's one thing the GBGB, I think, are doing and should be doing, and that is to get a full costing of everything that needs to be done to improve the lives of greyhounds.
Are you doing that, Mark?
Well, I'm always grateful for Clarissa for explaining exactly what we're doing anyway. So, because we work with registered charities such as the Dogs Trust, but obviously the Greyhound Trust as well. And that's exactly what we're looking to do. What has shrunk over the years is the amount of revenue that comes into the Greyhound Board, and that comes from a voluntary levy from bookmakers. Now, you may not know, your listeners may not know, that some bookmakers have always paid, and more are willing to pay a bit more as well, but they're not all willing to do that. And Clarissa's worked with myself and others, Lord Lipsey most notably, to try and get through DCMS more money to come into the sport, because that means we can fulfil our agreements that we set out when we publish this data around the greyhound commitment. And that is all looking at greyhound welfare.
But these are bookmakers who've ignored welfare. We've asked them to improve on the money. They've ignored Tracy Crouch, the minister at DCMS. They've ignored the EFRA Select Committee. We've been asking for a voluntary levy. They've had that. It's got to be a statutory levy. Plus, it's got to have a capital injection of money to improve the state of the kennels and the knowledge of those that are looking after greyhounds.
And you're calling for that, Mark. Would you think you'd get that money?
Well, unlike Clarissa, the pessimist in me says that we won't get a statutory levy, as is the case with horse racing. Although with Brexit coming up, who knows what's possible? Am I convinced that we might get the remaining money on the voluntary? Yeah, I am optimistic. We met with bookmakers last week.
Well, why don't you keep in touch and let us know how that goes? Thank you, Mark Bird, Managing Director of the GBGB, body that governs registered greyhound tracks. Also talking there to Clarissa Baldwin.